trying to figure out which of these two microphones is actually working for me today. Just as a quick background to myself, I've been working in the chicken industry and the poultry industry for about 19 years, and 19 years I've been specializing in ventilation systems. In all that time, I've never worked for an equipment company. So I've never sold equipment. I've never tried to sell equipment to any of my customers. It's in my best interest when I visit customers to have a look at what they're doing, how they're doing it, what facilities they have. And it's in my interest to try and help customers improve their performance, their production, maybe even their production costs, feed conversion, heating costs. So when I put this presentation together, it's not from a point of view of trying to convince people you need to change your houses, you need to build closed environment houses, you need to put equipment. It's not coming from a sales perspective. It's actually coming purely from a bird comfort and a bird production point of view. And in the previous presentation, you heard those words come up quite a few times. Bird comfort, performance, all of these things is what drives me when I'm looking at, at customers, at their facilities and how best to utilize. So we're going to go through some of these brief topics on the way through. Now, starting at looking at closed environment houses. As I said, poultry performance, to me, in my opinion, poultry performance revolves around bird comfort levels and air quality in the house. But that bird comfort and that air quality in the house depends on how well you can control your airflow into your house and the airflow through your house and over your birds. And how much control you actually have over that will depend on the ventilation system. It'll depend on your house, the quality of your house, and whatever kind of ventilation system you have in it. And I'll stand here now and I will tell you that in a closed environment house, closed environment, controlled environment, whichever wording you like to use, you will always have more control over the airflow into your house, through your house, on your birds. You will always have more control using a controlled environment or closed environment house than you do with open-sided houses. And that's the big thing. If I had to just summarize this whole presentation about closed environment houses, they give you more control. And if you are looking to get the best out of your birds and you're looking to try and get bird comfort levels, control is what you need. So, with closed environment housing, the things that we can do, we can control where the air will enter the house. Very, very important to be able to do that. We can control how the air will enter. Do we want to have the air enter very fast because we're trying to move it somewhere? Do we want to try and have it enter very slowly so it doesn't cause a stress on the birds? In the closed environment or the controlled environment house, we can control that. We can also control where the air goes. Do we have it enter the house and go upwards? Do we put it down straight onto the birds? We can control these things. We can also obviously control how much enters. We are not, in controlled environment or closed environment houses, we are not reliant on the wind outside. If it's very windy, we have a problem. On other days, if it's not windy enough, we have a different problem. With the closed environment, controlled environment house, you can control how much air will actually enter your house. And at the same time, provided your house is designed properly, we can also then look at how much air flows over the bird, at what speed it flows over the bird, how much cooling effect we have on the bird. So again, all of these things all combine together and are very, very crucial to have control over if you're looking at bird comfort levels. If we're looking at open houses and controlled environment houses, and we're just comparing the two, I think there's a lot of questions that you need to ask yourself. Am I getting maximum performance or production out of my current house? Do I have times of the year where my production drops off or my performance drops off and it's really because of outside conditions that are just not able to control. Am I utilizing floor area to the full extent? I've paid for the house, I've built the house. Am I actually using the floor area to my benefit? Am I getting the maximum kilograms per square meter from that house? In some parts of the country, I'm sure it happens, you may have heat stress, heat mortality. How much is this costing you? If it's happening every year, it's costing you every year. On broilers in particular, feed conversion rates, are the feed conversion rates exactly where you want them? That's an expense. That's a big expense to your production cost. If you're in part of the country that may get a bit cooler and you do use heating, the same question can be asked about heating. What am I paying? Am I paying too much for my heating? All of these things, all of those questions above will relate back to your ventilation system. It can relate back to your ventilation system. It can be controlled and can be influenced by your ventilation system. Just looking there very quickly out of one of the breed guides, one of the breed manuals, just looking at closed environment housing on broilers, you can get up to 30 kilograms per square meter. I know companies that get way above that, but their recommendation for open-sided houses all the way down at 20 to 25 kilograms per square meter. Obviously, these will also vary depending on the ambient humidity levels in your area. Now, when I get asked to go to customers, and maybe they're having production problems of whatever kind, when I visit your farms, when I visit their farms and I walk through, in my mind, the things that I'm about to put up here now is really what the bird is looking for. It's what we're trying to achieve with our ventilation system. So when I walk through your house, I'm busy looking at your house, your structure, whatever ventilation setup you have, and trying to picture whether I can provide these for the bird. So those of you who brood chicks, broilers, and on rearing farms, can you keep good, warm floor brooding temperatures for the chicks? We all know how important floor temperatures are. Can I control the temperature in that house for the birds, on the birds? In other words, can I control the effective temperature of the bird during the warm weather? Can I control the temperature of the air during the cooler weather? Can I provide oxygen? Can I provide good air quality, fresh air in the house for the birds? Can I do all of this without letting the temperature in my house fluctuate? Can I also do this in the colder periods without allowing cool air or colder air from outside to enter the house, drop straight down onto my birds, and chill them, stress them? In other words, I'm looking at these houses and thinking to myself, can I ventilate these houses effectively without causing any stress on my birds? And unfortunately, the birds don't know whether they're going into open-sided houses or closed houses. Whatever kind of house you have to try and provide these conditions for the bird. And without any doubt, again, I'll say, my opinion, my experience, the closed environment house is far better equipped to provide this. So, the house is the starting point to any good ventilation system. And for a closed environment house, I can talk to you for hours and hours, maybe even days, about the importance of making sure that your house is airtight, well sealed, and we're trying to avoid leakage of unwanted air into the house. The tighter you can seal your house, again, it comes back to the whole thing of control. We can determine where the air will enter your house and how it will. Once you control that, you start to gain control of things like bird comfort, which is your number one priority. People that are buying or building new houses, I often recommend to them, in your contract, you'll sign a contract with somebody who will come along and build a house for you. Always include somewhere in that contract a little clause that says, at the end of the contract, before I pay you the last X percentage, we will do a pressure test on the house. If the house passes the pressure test and can achieve above a certain amount of negative pressure in the house, then I pay you. That way you know right at the beginning you're getting a good product. Now, houses need to be airtight for closed environment. That does not mean that you cannot take an old house and convert it. I've converted and helped companies convert hundreds and hundreds of older houses. So it is possible to take older facilities, convert them into closed environment houses. These thermal images are very useful. If you have a look at this one very quickly, I can't shine on the screen, but if you look at the left-hand side, it's more, you can see the house is more closed up. See on the right-hand side, the dark blue color is the very cold temperature. You can see immediately where I've put the cross there, just below that. Lots of leakage because it's curtain-sided, it's got no insulation, lots of cold air leakage into the house. Look below that at the chicks. Look at the distribution of the chicks, how unhappy they are, how uncomfortable they are. The litter is colder, it's probably wet litter. There's fewer chicks in that area of the house. On the next part of the house, the side wall is better insulated, more sealed. There's obviously no cold leakage into that part of the house. And as a result, we have more chicks in that area of the house. So again, bringing me back to the whole thing, so important to make sure your house is sealed. This would be typical of a curtain-sided house in the cooler weather. Lots of leakage, no control over the incoming air. Very cold, probably wet litter along the edges of the house. Again, critical for bird comfort. We need to make sure we can seal the house and control where the air will enter. Now, of any chicken house, whether it be a closed environment house or an open-sided house, probably the roof is one of the most critical parts of that house. A well-designed roof should have the three components that I'm going to talk about now. First of all, insulation in the roof. This can vary between the most commonly used products are polyurethane, polystyrene, or glass wool. Very beneficial, keeps the heat in the winter or in the cooler periods, keeps the heat out in the hotter periods. A radiant barrier is usually that very shiny material that they put just below the roof level. It helps to reflect the radiant heat off your roof, reflect it away from your house, keeping radiant heat out of your house. And the third one I'm going to talk about in a while is this whole thing about thermal bridging. I'll talk to you about that in one or two slides. So if we look at the roof of a house, we have the outer roof. Usually we have some kind of structural steel on the inside. In the hot weather, we have the sun shining down onto the top of that roof. It heats the roof up nicely. That gets really hot. If you have a house with no insulation, no radiant barrier, that roof then starts to radiate heat back into your house. The unfortunate part for you with no insulation, no radiant barrier, is that when that roof radiates the heat into your house, you cannot ventilate radiant heat away. Even if you have a closed environment house with good tunnel ventilation, lots of wind speed, you cannot ventilate radiant heat away. Radiant heat is like standing outside. You can feel the sun baking on your head, especially me. You can feel it cooking you. Even if the wind is blowing, you can still feel that sun burning you. That is what radiant heat is. So you have to be protected from the radiant heat regardless of the type of house you have. Other houses put together a roof structure. They have good insulation in the top. What I'm going to talk about now is this thing that we call thermal bridging in your roof. So now we have good insulation to try and protect our house. But look what can happen to our house. We have the sun shining down onto the roof. It gets hot. We have direct contact between the roof and the steel. So it conducts the heat, transfers the heat through the steel to the inner surface, heats up my inner surface, and continues to radiate the heat into my house. So the way we get around these things, that's a typical structure there. We have the roof and some of the other structure. There's no protection there. We have direct steel against steel. The outer roof gets very hot. It just passes the heat through the steel all the way through, and eventually it goes down, and below that there's my inner roof going into my house, again, steel against steel. And so what happens, it just transmits the heat into my house. So just by taking those areas where we have steel against steel in the construction phase and making sure we put some kind of rubber, polystyrene in between to break the steel on steel contact, can help us in keeping our house cooler in the hot weather. Now, if we look at closed environment houses, these days closed environment houses, or as some people call them, combi tunnel houses, they should always have 3 ventilation systems: minimum ventilation, transition ventilation, tunnel ventilation. If we look at each of these, and just a quick comparison, closed environment against open-sided houses, we all know minimum ventilation is the time of the day, time of the cycle, when your house temperature is on the set point or maybe slightly below that set point temperature. So it's a period where we're adding a bit of heat to the house to keep the birds comfortable, but at the same time we know always we have to be providing and supplying fresh air into the house to keep good air quality for the birds. If we look at the way we manage things like this, minimum ventilation in open-sided houses, usually it's a lot of manipulation of side curtains, trying to allow just enough air into the house, keeping the curtains closed a little bit, watching the wind directions, how much wind, trying to make sure we can still keep the birds nice and warm and comfortable. So in those houses, we will always, provided we've got some insulation in the roof, we will always have our heat accumulating in the roof. But if we cannot control how or where the air will enter, we get a lot of leakage. Air enters the house straight down onto the birds, onto our litter, wet litter problems, stresses on the bird.